Our goal today actually is to complete this mimer, and just in the nick of time, because it's next week's parasha. So what are we learning about? We're learning about Vayigash Elav Yehuda. We're learning about this incredible confrontation that occurs between the two brothers. Of course, at that point, Yehuda doesn't know that it's his brother. He thinks this is the vicious viceroy of Egypt who's just trying to make his life difficult. And there's this power play, this showdown between the two of them. And what we've learned through the course of this mimer is that the conflict or the confrontation between Yehuda and Yosef is way larger than the conflict of two individuals, or even the leader of the family of Jews against the leader of the country of Egypt. It's way bigger than all of that. Because what we've learned is that these are two archetypes, and that Yehuda and Yosef represent two different kinds of spiritual energy, which is why their conflict is not simply restricted to those few moments of altercation in the throne room of Egypt, but actually it is an ongoing stress between the two of them right throughout history, all the way to the time of Mashiach. So we're not going to talk about that in detail, the time of Mashiach at this point, but I would like to illustrate this. We're told that in the time of Mashiach there are two characters, two personalities. There is the well-known Mashiach, who is called Mashiach ben David, Mashiach, a descendant from David, who is a descendant from Yehuda. And then there's another much more mysterious individual called Mashiach ben Yosef, a Mashiach from the dynasty of Yosef. The fact that there are two different expressions of Mashiach, two different kinds of redemption, two different personalities that represent emancipation of the Jewish people, by this stage of the mimer should not be such a surprise to us, because we have learned that these are two archetypes. These are two individuals who represent two different leadership styles, who represent two different ways in which divine energy becomes apparent in our world. And that's also why these, at certain points in our history, were two different kingdoms who were at war with each other. Because it's just the physical manifestation of a spiritual tension. What is the spiritual tension? Yosef represents the flow of energy from Hashem into the world. So Yosef represents how you dominate the world, how you overcome the world with holiness. Yosef represents what we call Shem Ma, the manifestation of God's name in a format that pumps divine awareness into the world, ready or not. Yosef represents the concept of Torah, where Hashem presents his infinite divine wisdom in a form that, here it is, take it, I'm giving it to you, it will change your life. Yosef represents what we call the initial energy from God that will then at some point be reciprocated by us. That is what we call Zah, Zeira Anpin, the collection of divine energies that stimulate awareness of Hashem in the physical reality, in the world that we live in. Yehuda is a completely different energy. Yehuda's focus is just as much on taking our world and transforming it into a place of holiness and a place of divine awareness, a manifestation of Hashem's essence, as much as Yosef, except the approach is completely different. Yehuda's approach is, don't wait for divine inspiration. Don't rely on Hashem superimposing godliness onto the world. Dig, work, push, gather up stalks of wheat and turn them into bundles that have meaning, that can be used to connect to Hashem. It's human endeavor. Yehuda represents our aspirations. Yehuda represents our perspiration. Yehuda represents why we were created. Because it's all very well for Hashem to do all of the work, and he can in a flash, and with the great power of the person who sits on the throne, he could change everybody's reality in just a moment. But really what we want, or what Hashem wants, is a Yehuda who stands up with courage and says, this is not acceptable and something has to change and we need to do something about it. And so he represents the manifestation of divine energy called the name Ban, which is the name of cultivating holiness. And he represents what we call Malchus, which is the energy of the divine that is in a sense detached. It's kind of out of sync. It's not naturally aware of holiness, but it allows the opportunity to work and to discover that holiness. And the question really is, which of the two is dominant, or which of the two is primary? They're two different energies. Both of them want to achieve the same purpose, which is that the world should be completely filled with knowledge of God, in the same way as the ocean bed is covered in water. They have identical goals, but completely different methods. So which one is the primary? Well, in the Yehuda and Yosef story, it seems like the main thing is Yosef. That's what we need. We need inspiration. We need divine input. That's what we need. He sits on the throne. And Yehuda has to approach him meekly, humbly, and say, please, please give us what we need. And yet, at the same time, the Zohar tells us that that story of the interaction and altercation between Yehuda and Yosef is the story of the format of our davening, where you have to be somech geula litfila, where you have to take geula, which is the blessing to thank Hashem for Him stepping into our world and emancipating us, and you have to pin it to tefillah, which is our human endeavor, us trying to pray. And the fact that you bring the geula to the davening makes it sound like the main thing is the davening, and the geula has to be brought into the room. So which one is it? Which one is primary? Hashem's input or human endeavor? And in answering that question, effectively we gave a Jewish answer, which is to say both. It really just depends where you are in the course of history, because at the current state of history, when we're not yet at the stage of Mashiach, and we're not yet in the Geula, well then it seems that the primary energy is divine flow, above to below. When Mashiach comes, then we will suddenly recognize, and it will be revealed to us, how amazing our effect and how amazing our input is. And a great way to explain that is to look at the famous debate in the Gemara, what is the most important thing? The study of Torah or the behavior in line with that study? Talmud or Maaseh? And effectively the Gemara gives us a strange answer. It says, Talmud Gadol shemevi lidei Maaseh. That the greatness is actually study, because study brings us to deed, which gives the implication that deed is primary, but also helps us to understand that deeds don't achieve what they need to achieve until you first go through the process of Torah. Torah changes you. It weakens the crassness of the human. It diminishes the animal soul. It allows the neshama to flow through those mitzvahs. So you need the two in tandem. Now that we're living in the pre-Messianic age, we relate better to what's called Giluyim, a revealed aspect of the divine. So Hanukkah, we're all excited. Why are we so excited about Hanukkah? Because we saw the miracles. Because we see the light. That speaks to us. That's exactly what we appreciate. When you can see it, when you can feel it, when you can experience, when it's not theoretical. When Moshiach comes, though, we will no longer depend on Giluyim, which is tailor-made, bite-sized, bespoke divine energy. When Mashiach comes, it will be Hashem's essence that is completely exposed, and then we'll realize that that essence was accessed through our deeds, through our mitzvahs. And so, we're at the point where we effectively understand that there's a dynamic that runs between the two. There has to first be inspiration from Hashem, otherwise we would never be stimulated to actually start doing what Hashem wants. But then once that stimulation has happened, the Talmud mevi lidei Maaseh, then actually the most valuable thing is that we get on and do it. We actually perform the mitzvahs. That's really the chap, is to actually perform the mitzvahs, because that's what's going to reveal Hashem's essence in this world. Now all of that, we said, will help us to understand the balance, how in the story, Yehuda is in the position of weakness and Yosef is in the position of power, and yet the Zohar compares that to davening, where the davening is in the position of power and davening is associated with Yehuda, and Geula, redemption, which is associated with Yosef, needs to approach the davening. So we said in order to understand that, we have one question from last week that we haven't yet answered. And this question, once we address it, will help us fill in the last piece of this puzzle. What was the question we had last week? Why did Yosef wait before revealing his identity to his brothers? Because the timeline goes as follows. The brothers come down to Egypt. They don't know that they're dealing with Yosef. He gives them food and is really nice to them. Then he says, tell me about your family. And they say, we've got a little brother at home. He says, oh, really? Well, in that case, I'm not going to be so nice anymore. And until I see that little brother, don't ever come back here for food again. And they go back home. In the interim, he keeps Shimon as collateral. One brother in prison. It's actually all a facade. It's not really in prison. And that's the collateral. So now the brothers go back to Yaakov and they say, listen, this is what happened. He was really harsh on us, and he said he's not giving us food unless you bring Binyamin down. And Yaakov is dead against it, not willing to send Binyamin to Egypt. Eventually Yehuda says, it's on me, I'll take responsibility, and we don't have a choice because otherwise we're going to die of starvation. And so Binyamin comes down, and that's the moment that Yosef is waiting for. He wants to see his little brother, and he wants to see how the brothers treat their youngest brother. That's what he's waiting for. So he comes up with this plan. What's the plan? When they leave, then he's going to put his so-called magical goblet inside inside Binyamin's bag of food. Let them leave the city. Send the cops after them to say, why did you steal it? Bring them all back, and then say, that's it, I'm going to now take Binyamin as a slave and see if they fight for his freedom. So the question is, why does he have to do this? Only after Yehuda now begs and pleads that Binyamin should be released, then we're told, Vayisapak Yosef, that's it, Yosef couldn't handle it anymore. V'lo yachol Yosef lihisapek. He couldn't handle it anymore. He couldn't withhold himself anymore. And so he revealed his identity. Why didn't he just do that while they were still there? Why send them away, lay a trap, bring them back, right then there, like he did with Shimon. He took Shimon right in front of their eyes and arrested him. He could have done that to Binyamin as well. What game is Yosef playing over here? Much, much more importantly, what is the spiritual significance of Yosef's strategy? So let's have a look. Unakudas habir bazeh. So the explanation is as follows. In order to understand this question, we first have to understand who Binyamin is, because we have a problem. It's the problem we suffer from frequently when we learn stories in the Torah. We learn those stories and we think of those characters in some kind of cartoon form. Meaning to say, you in your mind very likely have a picture that Binyamin, this poor little child who's been brought down by his big brothers because he's the youngest, and they're obviously all these adults, and they bring him down to Egypt, and the next thing he's caught up in this international scandal and he's being arrested. In your mind, that's what you think of Binyamin, is just this young boy, neber, shame, poor guy. Let's understand who Binyamin is. The Binyamin hu tzadik tachtoin. Binyamin is called by the Kabbalists the lower tzaddik. Let's just contextualize that. Yosef is called tzaddik elyon, the supernal tzaddik. Yosef is the tzaddik who operates at some kind of spiritual level that is beyond not just the ordinary, but even the ordinary tzaddik. That's why his brothers don't understand him, because they're all righteous individuals, but he's in a league of his own, so they cannot begin to fathom his reality. He is tzaddik elyon. He's a tzaddik who operates top down. He sits on the throne and tells everybody else what to do. Everybody has to bow to him. He's this incredibly intense bundle of holiness. And Binyamin is his counterpart. Binyamin is tzaddik tachtoin, the tzaddik who works with the lower reality. The tzaddik, in a sense, who gets his hands dirty. Shemayle hamekabel milamato lemailo, o mekashroi behamashpia. Binyamin's spiritual role is to take the mekabel, whoever is on the receiving end of divine flow and inspiration. It's Binyamin's job to take the mekabel and elevate the mekabel to become closer to the mashpia, to lift the recipient to be, in a sense, on a par with the source. Yosef's job is to supply the mekabel. Yosef's got this huge, massive repository of energy. Because what's the story? The story is that Yosef's got what we need in order to live. So Yosef is the one who's got the storehouses of energy to share with other people. Yosef causes flow to the so-called have-not, and Binyamin's job is to take the have-not and elevate the have-not to become a have, to become spiritually full. Therefore, ve'ikar halo asman de hamalchus hu al yedei binyamin. And therefore, we've already spoken about the fact that there are two directions of flow. There's Mayin Dechurim, the so-called masculine energy flow that comes from Yosef, Zeranpe, in the higher realms, God, into the world. And that is matched by Mayin Nukvin, which is the so-called feminine waters, which is this groundswell of connection to Hashem, represented up until this point by Yehuda. And now we're learning not just by Yehuda, but essentially or fundamentally by Binyamin. Just parenthetically, it is very interesting to note that the Beis HaMikdash, which of course is the epicenter of Judaism, had to touch Yehuda's portion of land, but was primarily in Binyamin's portion of land, which is really interesting, because there you see this confluence of Yehuda and Binyamin as the two representatives of the energy of Malchus. Velochein. Therefore, if you really want to understand the dynamic, here's how the dynamic works. You've got Yosef, who's in a class of his own, and his brothers, who are in a so-called ordinary spiritual class. When I say ordinary spiritual class, it means to say they are deeply, deeply holy individuals, great tzaddikim, but in a sense, almost if you could say, predictably so. As opposed to Yosef, who's an unpredictable tzaddik. Explain to you what I mean by that. Reuven, Shimon, all the way through to Binyamin, they're predictable tzaddikim. Take them into an environment which is nice and pristine and holy, and they will be fine. So they're all shepherds. That excises them out of the physical world, and they can live in tranquility, and they can be fine and do what Hashem wants. Yosef is an unpredictable tzaddik. You take Yosef, plop him down in the middle of promiscuity, in the middle of idolatry, and he flies. He's amazing. He remains, Yosef, completely committed to his values. He brings up children who are committed to the same values. He takes over Egypt. So there's this energy between the two, between Yosef on the one hand and the brothers on the other hand. Yosef is the inspirer. They don't get it at first, and that's why they're very, very put off by Yosef. They don't get it, that his dream's all about, you're going to need to come to me, and I'm going to give you that energy, and I'm going to inspire you. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're good. We don't need you to sit on top of us. And somehow or other, he has to get them to realize that and to recognize that they actually have to make a move of connection to him rather than a move of resistance. Their whole history is resistance of Yosef, and now they've actually got to warm to him. So So who is the one that causes the main lifting of the lower, the Malchus energy towards Hashem? Binyamin. Velochein. Ikar halo asman de hashvatim hoyo keshebo leYosef b'payim hashniya b'shvil Binyamin. What needs to happen in the story is the brothers have to break their hardened exterior. Because the brothers are not just brave and courageous, and we're not going to succumb to the whims of the person who sits on the Egyptian throne. The brothers are spiritually powerful, and in their spiritual reality, there is no way that they need some kind of higher dimension to touch them. They have to realize that. When you realize what you need, that's when you start to seek what you need, and that's when you find it. So until such time as there's like this humbling of the brothers, until such time as there's a diminishing of the brothers' force, they cannot get from Yosef what Yosef has to offer them. And Yosef can't impose it. It has to come from them. It has to be an aha epiphany, where they suddenly realize we need something from Yosef. Binyamin, out of all of the brothers, is the catalyst, because Binyamin is the one who is most spiritually attuned to this need. So until the brothers come back for a second time to Egypt and then have to stand up in defense of Binyamin, until that time, they haven't yet been exposed to and had to experience that yearning, that urge, that thirst to connect to Yosef's source of inspiration. And Yosef knows this. So Yosef has to create the correct environment. So therefore, why does Yosef choose that his strategy will be hide this magical goblet in Binyamin's backpack? Why? הוא בכדי לאור הלא הזמן דהמלכוס הוא על ידי המשכה מזו כנ"ל, because earlier on in the Mimer we said that any time that we are going to be motivated to want to connect to Hashem, it will always first begin by Hashem planting a seed of inspiration. Yosef in the story is the agent of Hashem to plant that seed. We need the brothers to wake up. We need the brothers to feel that urge. We need the brothers to reach up towards Yosef, but that will only happen if Yosef starts the process. So he has to create the environment. How? By creating an untenable situation. Binyamin is going to be arrested. We have no choice now. We have to come and, so to speak, beg from Yosef. More than that. And here's where it gets very applicable to us. We could take it a step further. The fact that Yosef's specific strategy was to take his magical goblet and hide it inside Binyamin's backpack, and specifically without anybody in the crowd getting any inkling of the fact that it was his plot. Why did he do that? Because what we want is that the mekabel, the recipient, should reach out of their own volition. And the only way that can work is if the mashpia hides his impact. Let's understand what that means. Let's just say a parent-child relationship where the parent obviously is the one that has, in a sense, the reservoirs of resources, money, wisdom, experience, emotional maturity, things that a child doesn't have. And every parent will know that there's certain times where your child behaves in such a way where you think, you don't appreciate me, you don't appreciate what I do for you, you don't appreciate what I give you. So now you tell me, how often does it work for a parent to turn to the child and lecture the child about how much you don't appreciate me? How often does that get the child to appreciate you? Not very effective, right? Because as long as the lead comes from the mashpia, the one with the resources, the mekabel, the one without the resources, keeps taking it for granted. Oh, okay. So you tell me, all right, give me a speech about how much you do for me. Okay, whatever, I take it for granted. When do children appreciate parents? When parents are smart, when they're strategic, when they create scenarios that leave the child without a choice but to recognize the parent's value. Okay, fine, that's fine. You don't want to hear my opinion? That's fine. Why don't you go work it out for yourself? Right? You want to behave in a particular, that's fine. Why don't you pay for it yourself? Then suddenly the child starts to appreciate, hang on a second, I actually need my parent. Whoa, hang on, that's not what I meant. No, it's okay. You think that you're so smart and independent. Go ahead and work it out. If the child is aware of the fact that you are actually orchestrating the whole experience, they're not going to respond. So it's got to be behelem. The mashpia's role has to be hidden. Yosef is helping the brothers to reach a new threshold of their own spiritual development that they could never have reached on their own. But he can't let them know that that's what's happening. So he has to pretend as if it's totally circumstantial, and now they have to choose how to respond. And that's what we want. We want them to choose how to respond. That's what Yosef wants. Choose, work it out. How are you going to deal with this? I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to give you clues, I'm just going to give you trouble. Work it out, because that's when you'll find your greatness. So what happens? So they now go ruffling through everybody's bags, and what do? They find that there is this magical goblet, and guess what? It's in Binyamin's case. This is a disaster. So at the face value of the story, that's a bad moment in the story. Oy vey. Oh my goodness me, it's true. Binyamin has the contraband in his bag. Terrible, terrible story on the face of it. Now let's look at it spiritually. Why did Yosef put the cup in Binyamin's bag? Because he's planting a seed for growth and development that they had never before experienced. Now that they find the cup, what happens? They start to experience that growth and development. Now they suddenly have to stand up to an authority that they had never had to confront before in their lives, which means they have to dig deep and find resources they had never needed to use before in their lives. So the minute the cup comes out of the bag, that's not the worst part of the story, that's the best part of the story. Because now you're going to fight. Now you're going to find strength inside of yourself that you never knew that you had, which, by the way, Yosef has orchestrated and you didn't even realize it's happening. As is obvious from the story, the brothers, the moment they become aware of the fact that there is the cup, they are automatically lifted to a whole different game to what they were experiencing when it was just theoretical, maybe somebody's got the cup. You're making an allegation, we don't believe it's true. Now Yehuda's response, because now they've got to go back to the palace and they've got to deal with this issue, which they had never anticipated. Yehuda's response seems maybe like it's out of line with what we're describing here, because we're describing over here that Yosef's this brilliant tzaddik, and that he's not just testing his brother's loyalty and if they've done teshuvah for having sold him, but he's actually working a process with them that will take them to an entirely different experience of their own spiritual development. So if it's such a powerful, beautiful, uplifting experience for all of them, orchestrated by Yosef behind the scenes, why is Yehuda's response apparently so negative? So once they discover the cup in Binyamin's bag, Omar Yehuda's immediate response is to Yosef, Hashem has found us to be guilty. Hashem has exposed our sin. Now, you've just said this is a whole spiritual experience that they're going through that's going to elevate them to a whole different level. So why do you now feel like a sinner if you've been elevated to a higher level? Should, if you're elevated to a higher level, you will feel inspired, uplifted, empowered. No? Isn't that what you expect? You tell me. If somebody promised you that you were going to land up at a higher spiritual level, would you not anticipate that when that happens, your eyes would open and you would become knowledgeable or inspired or spiritual or something? Who expects that when you get elevated, your first response is, Oi, I feel inadequate. I feel like a sinner. Why? So in Gemara language, we use an expression which is called hi hanoisenes, which means that's exactly why. The reason you think it shouldn't happen is exactly the reason it should happen. Because as soon as a person is spiritually upgraded, even the most subtle issue is suddenly, in terms of your new spiritual status, a big deal. Let's put it into language we can all relate to. It's really simple. Let's say that a person is irreligious. So they don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep kosher. So we're going to start getting all nitpicky about the fact that their esrog has a brown mark on it. Whatever. You know what they say? Should be your biggest problem. Every rabbi knows this. You have this conversation with somebody about some particular area of their spiritual development. You look at the person, you know who the person is, you say, Halavai, that would be your biggest issue. But once somebody is at a whole different spiritual level, it is now an issue. So you keep a beautiful Shabbos and you have the highest standard of kosher food in your home and you put on tefillin every day, and the tefillin that you have are highly expensive. You've got the best mezuzahs on your door. And that's your esrog. It's got a brown mark on it. As they say in the classics, passt nicht. It's beneath your dignity. That's the moment of eye-opening for Yehuda. Previously, Yehuda thinks that this whole business of subtle areas of spiritual development that he hadn't yet experienced, okay, we live in our spiritual cocoon, totally separate from the rest of the world, and that's great. As long as we can be in a holy space. Now he's been lifted up. He says, Hashem has shown us that what previously we thought was not a big deal spiritually is actually a big deal. Because now we're at a whole different level, and now we have a whole different appreciation. And now we've been sensitized in an unprecedented fashion. Now we feel that there's a whole dimension of godliness we don't have. Vayigash, let's go forward and try and get that dimension of godliness. Now he approaches Yosef in the storyline to beg for clemency. But in the spiritual line, he approaches Yosef because now he finally clicks, even if it's subconscious. Yosef's got spirituality to offer me that I've never experienced before. I now discover a whole dimension of lack in my own development that I never knew I had. And this is the story of real spiritual growth. Real spiritual growth is that there has to be a mashpia, there has to be somebody who's beyond me, somebody who's a great tzaddik, somebody who sees the world in a totally, radically different way, and that person has to be in my life. And that person shouldn't just be in my life as some kind of a download, in case of emergency, break glass, if I've got a problem, I ask them for a brocha or anything like that. That person has to be somebody who I understand is going to challenge me to grow in ways that I never imagined possible. And I have to yearn and thirst for that connection. I have to always want to reach out and say, so how do I get the guidance and the teaching that I need in my life? So now let's take the story further, still reading it now in the spiritual context, not in the basic storyline. So why is Yehuda approaching Yosef at this point in time? Because it's an aha moment, and he recognizes, even if it's subconsciously, that Yosef has the power. Yosef is this tzaddik elyon. Yosef is this incredible inspirer, and I need him to please look at me. How does he do it? So Yehuda says to Yosef, first of all, please let me speak. Please look in my direction, acknowledge me, connect with me. And then he says more than that, because you are like Paroi. Now, the simple version of the story is he's saying you're behaving like Paroi who constantly changes his opinions, or he's saying just like Paroi, I'll take you down, I'll take him down, various commentaries. But spiritually what he's saying is incredibly deep. The explanation is, you see, there's a problem. The problem is you go to Yosef, you're a Yehuda character, which most of us are. You're a person whose entire spirituality is all about human endeavor, and our endeavors have their limits. And we're trying to reach Yosef, this powerful super tzaddik, and say, touch me, inspire me, switch me on, lift me up. And Yosef looks at you and says, you understand, for me to enter your world, to engage with you, is a serious spiritual setback. Like all those great tzaddikim in history who didn't want the job. Because for them it is a spiritual setback. It's a step down. I've got to go into your world with your things, with your limitations. So Yehuda has to tell Yosef, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. On the face of it, and in the first stages, it will be a huge spiritual setback for you. But what's going to happen after that is you'll be catapulted to a spiritual level even beyond yourself. You think you're benefiting me. Actually, you're going to grow you. By Yosef sharing of his spiritual world with Yehuda and the brothers, Yosef will be elevated. Your world, which represents Zeir Anpin, the divine, revealed spiritual energy of inspiration, your world will be elevated. You will become like Paroi. What does it mean you'll become like Paroi? How is that a compliment? Who wants to be like Paroi? I mean, Yosef worked for him and he used it to his advantage, but I think the last thing Yosef would have wanted would to be like Paroi, surely, right? Except that spiritually, Paroi also has a very intriguing secret. The Yosef, Yosef's entire spiritual experience, although it is exponentially greater than the spiritual experience of the other brothers, even though Yosef is tzaddik elyon, is this incredible repository of divine energy, in spite of all of that, Yosef touches the level of Chokhmah and down. Chokhmah is the first of the 10 Sephiros, the first of the 10 manifestations of divine energy. As great and powerful as Chokhmah is, it is the first of a series of, so to speak, defined energies of God. So that's how high Yosef reaches. Yehuda tells Yosef, when you start to share with us, we are so lowly. You're at the top level of the 10 spheros, and we're Malchus, the lowest level of 10 spheros. What's going to happen is, you'll become like the king. King is always a symbol of Keser, which is the highest dimension, just like the crown sits outside of the body, on top of the head. Keser is that energy of divine revelation that is beyond the whole system. The whole system, Chochmah to Malchus, is like the body. Keser is a whole different level. Even Yosef, who is the greatest part of the system, doesn't naturally access Keser, which is higher than the system. Says Yehuda to Yosef, Yosef, you're this brilliant tzaddik. You are tzaddik Yesod Olam. You are tzaddik Elyon. You are this incredible human being who has access to dimensions of holiness we cannot dream of. But you're still part of the spiritual system. And the minute you do what your job is, which is to share inspiration with us ordinary people, that's when you'll be given the opportunity to rise above the system. Of a keser, gufo primius a keser, to be, so to speak, spiritually pedantic, not only will you have access to the level of keser, which is so high, but to the deepest level of keser. That will finally answer our question that there consistently looked like there was always this contradiction. Yehuda has to approach Yosef sounding like Yosef has all the strength, and yet the Zohar says this is similar to bringing Geula close to Tefillah, which implies that Tefillah, which is the world of Yehuda and the world of human endeavor, has all the strength. Now it all starts to make sense because even in the story of Yehuda physically approaching Yosef, even though in that story Yosef holds the key, even though in that story Yosef is the powerful one, that story too shows us Yehuda's power. I think I mentioned this much earlier in the Mimer. Who has greater strength? The person who sits on the throne and therefore is powerful, or the person who has inner strength and is willing to challenge the throne? By Yehuda going to Yosef, Yehuda's actually implying to Yosef, I have the strength you need. The only way you'll have that strength is by giving me what I need, but at the end of the day, I have the strength that you need. Because when your world, the world of divine revelation, shares with our world, the world of divine blindness, that's when your world gets elevated. Because the purpose of holiness is not to remain in its special pristine world. The purpose of holiness is to touch the parts of the world that are not already there. It's quite similar to what the Gemara said. The greatness of Torah learning is what? That it brings you to deed. Not just that the greatness of learning is practically because then you'll know what to do, but by learning Torah and then applying it in action, your Torah learning will be elevated. Your Torah learning will become deeper. And that's the entire theme of this whole story. There is a world of spiritual awareness and revelation. It's a very inspiring place to be. We don't live there. There is a world of spiritual blindness where you battle through every single decision that you make as a human being. We live there. We beg, please, can we have more inspiration? Please, can we have more revelation? Help us, inspire us, stimulate us, turn us on. Hashem, give us something. And every time that he does, meaning say every time the dimension of godliness called Zer Anpin, or the name Ma, every time it does share, inspire, touch us, it benefits. We bring it to its fruition, to its elevation. And that, last of all, will explain the link, because there always has to be one, between the Parsha of Vayigash and the Haftarah of Vayigash. The Parashas Vayigash Shetoichnu Shele Asid Lavoi, the Shetoichnu Shele Asid Lavoi Yehuda L'Maile MiYosef. The Haftarah of Vayigash sounds like the contradiction to the Parasha. The Parasha is about Yosef being the powerful one and Yehuda groveling. The Haftarah is all about how Yehuda is going to be the powerful one, even greater than Yosef. How is that the same theme? Because as we've just described, the greatness and the elevation that the Zeir Anpin, that the world of revealed godliness will enjoy once it shares with the world of Malchus, is preparatory work for how life will be in the time of Moshiach. Because in the time of Moshiach, we'll see that Malchus ultimately is actually the goal, the purpose, and therefore the expression of the highest degree of the divine. And that's what we say in the Haftarah. V'avdi David melech aleim gomer. That my servant David will be the ultimate king in the time of Moshiach. V'David avdi nasi lohem lo'elam. As the other pasuk says, it's the same message, that my servant David will be the nasi, the prince, the king over the Jewish people. In other words, everything that we're doing in our world today, every mitzvah that we do, and every bit of Torah that we learn in order to get us to do those mitzvahs and to understand and appreciate those mitzvahs, is all fulfilling the same theme, which is revelation of godliness is designed to get us to, in our world, in our experience, do what Hashem wants, and that gives value to these revealed aspects of teaching and of learning and of inspiration, and all of that will be revealed in the time of Mashiach, where we'll emerge as the heroes, and our deeds will emerge as the cause and catalyst for the revelation of Hashem in this world. But bias Mashiach tzidkenu b'korev mamish, that will occur with the coming of Mashiach. May it happen not just speedily, but mamish, literally, in the immediate future. Quite a powerful mimer.